She wrote, "I'm staying at my ex's, he's having a crisis, trust me," and I answered, "No problem, stay as long as you want," then vanished completely. For days later she came home to discover I'd erased our entire relationship overnight. Some people don't realize what they have until the invoice comes due, and by then the account's already closed. I learned that lesson watching my mother work 3 jobs after my father decided fatherhood wasn't his calling, so when someone shows me where I rank on their priority list, I don't argue with the data. I'm a database architect in Minneapolis, 31 years old, pulling $88,000 a year designing systems that handle millions of transactions without breaking. The work requires precision, pattern recognition, and the ability to see problems 3 moves ahead, skills that apparently don't translate well to recognizing when your girlfriend's heart is still tethered to someone else's frequency. My childhood taught me that stability doesn't happen by accident. My father walked out when I was 7, leaving my mother with 2 kids, a mortgage, and a receptionist's salary that covered maybe half our expenses. I watched her leave for her second shift at the diner while I was doing homework, come home at midnight smelling like grease and coffee, then wake up at 5 for her weekend house-cleaning jobs. She never complained, never made us feel like burdens, just kept moving forward with this quiet determination that shaped everything I became. By the time I graduated high school, I'd promised myself I'd build the kind of life where the people I loved never had to choose between rent and groceries, where planning ahead meant security instead of anxiety. I met Kelly 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser for childhood literacy programs. I was there volunteering with the tech setup, making sure the donation processing system wouldn't crash when people started swiping cards, and she was working the pharmaceutical company's sponsorship table in a blue dress that made every guy in the room forget what they were drinking. Kelly was 27, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and had this laugh that made you feel like you'd said something genuinely clever even when you absolutely hadn't. She approached me during the silent auction, asked if I could fix the tablet at her table that kept freezing, and somehow that tech support call turned into 2 hours of conversation that made me forget I was supposed to be monitoring server loads. We talked about her job visiting medical offices to explain drug protocols, my work building systems that protected patient data, the bizarre overlap between our worlds that we'd never considered before. She told me about growing up in a small town outside Duluth, about wanting to prove she could make it in a bigger city, about her dream of eventually moving into pharmaceutical research instead of sales. I told her about my mother's determination, about learning to code in high school because I realized technology was the fastest route out of uncertainty, about finding satisfaction in building things that worked invisibly in the background. Our first year felt like evidence that planning actually paid off. We established rhythms that worked. Weekend getaways to this lakeside resort 2 hours north where we'd rent kayaks and she'd pretend to be interested in bird watching while I pretended her paddling technique wasn't going to capsize us both. We hosted dinner parties at my apartment where I'd cook and she'd handle the social orchestration, making sure conversations flowed and everyone felt included. She had this gift for remembering details about people, would ask my coworker's wife about her pottery classes 3 months after hearing about them once, made everyone feel seen. I appreciated that quality, thought it showed depth of character, someone who genuinely cared about the people in her orbit. We split expenses fairly, maintained separate apartments but spent 4 or 5 nights a week together, built something that felt sustainable rather than desperate. My mother liked her immediately, said she reminded her of the daughter she'd always wished she'd had, someone warm and socially competent in ways I'd never quite managed. But somewhere around month 18, the channel started showing interference. I'd mentioned looking at houses together, trying to calculate what we could afford with both our incomes combined and reasonable down payment expectations, and Kelly would redirect to what her friend Ashley was doing with her boyfriend or mention that her lease wasn't up for 8 more months anyway. When I brought up engagement timelines, not proposing immediately but at least discussing whether we were headed in that direction, she'd laugh it off with comments about not wanting to be one of those couples who rushed into things just because society expected it. Fair enough, I thought. We're both adults with careers and individual lives. No need to follow someone else's script. Except the script she was following started including scenes I wasn't part of. She developed this habit during our dinner parties of disappearing to her car for 20-minute stretches, coming back with some excuse about work emails that couldn't wait or her mother calling with a minor crisis. Her calendar, which she'd previously shared openly, became classified information. She'd mentioned client meetings that ran until 9 p.m. on Tuesday nights, pharmaceutical training sessions that somehow required her presence every Thursday afternoon, regional conferences that always seemed to fall on weekends when I'd suggested we take a trip together. I'm not naturally suspicious, probably to my detriment. I generally assume people mean what they say and say what they mean, that adults in relationships communicate honestly about their needs and limitations. But I'm also trained to recognize patterns in data, to notice when systems start behaving erratically before they crash completely. Kelly's behavior was showing all the warning signs of a woman maintaining parallel processes, running background operations she didn't want the primary system to detect. She'd check her phone during conversations with this furtive intensity, quickly closing apps when I walked into the room. She'd receive calls she'd decline, then excuse herself to the bathroom and return 15 minutes later looking emotionally drained. When I asked if everything was okay, if work was becoming overwhelming or family issues needed attention, she'd snap that I was being paranoid and controlling, that she was entitled to privacy, that healthy relationships didn't require detailed accounting of every moment spent apart. All technically true, except healthy relationships also don't require defensive deflection every time your partner expresses basic concern. The woman who'd been so attentive to everyone else's details had suddenly become allergic to anyone noticing hers, and the irony wasn't lost on me even if I wasn't ready to fully process what it meant. The name appeared gradually, like malware infiltrating a clean system. Travis. Her ex-boyfriend from before we met, someone she'd dated for 4 years before their relationship ended over his stubborn refusal to leave his hometown for opportunities elsewhere. She'd mentioned him exactly twice in our first year together, both times dismissively, framing him as a cautionary tale about men who chose comfort over ambition, who'd rather stay in familiar mediocrity than take risks for something better. I'd filed him under a resolved history and moved on, the way you do with ex-partners who served their narrative purpose and exited the story cleanly. Except Travis hadn't exited anything. He'd just been running in background mode, waiting for the right exploit to reactivate his access. The first call came during our date night at this Italian place we'd been trying to get reservations at for 6 weeks. We'd just ordered appetizers when Kelly's phone lit up with his name, and I watched her face cycle through surprise, concern, and something that looked uncomfortably like relief. She stepped outside to take it, returned 12 minutes later with the appetizers cold and her attention completely fractured. Travis lost his job, she said, picking at her calamari without eating any. He's completely devastated. 22 months at this logistics company and they just eliminated his entire division without warning. He's worried about losing his apartment, about his resume gaps, about being 30 and starting over. I made appropriate sympathetic sounds while thinking that 22 months at one company was hardly a career-defining tenure and most adults navigated job loss without requiring emergency emotional support from ex-girlfriends. But I kept that observation to myself because Kelly was clearly upset and sometimes supporting your partner means listening rather than analyzing. I told him I'd help him update his resume this weekend, she continued. He doesn't really know anyone else who understands professional documents, and I feel like I owe him that much after everything we went through together. Everything they went through together. 4 years of apparently her supporting his lack of ambition, and now she was signing up for encores. The emergency calls became a feature, not a bug. 2 weeks after the job termination crisis, Travis's brother had a motorcycle accident, non-life-threatening but serious enough that Travis needed someone to talk to about his complex feelings regarding family trauma and masculine vulnerability. Kelly canceled our planned weekend at the lakeside resort to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, somewhere neutral where he could process his emotions without the stigma of seeking professional help. She returned 4 hours later emotionally exhausted, explaining that Travis had childhood issues around hospitals that made his brother's accident particularly triggering. I suggested that maybe Travis should consider actual therapy instead of using his ex-girlfriend as an unpaid counselor, which earned me a lecture about toxic masculinity and how men's mental health struggles get dismissed by people who don't understand the complexity of emotional processing. 3 weeks after that, Travis's grandmother started declining rapidly, And apparently her potential death was reactivating his abandonment issues from when his father left during his adolescence. Kelly needed to meet him at the park near his apartment so he could talk through his anticipatory grief in a safe environment. These sessions stretched from 1 hour to 2 to 3, always with Kelly returning red-eyed and drained, like she'd been running emotional marathons on someone else's behalf. I started tracking the pattern because that's what I do. I identify recurring processes and analyze their resource consumption. Tuesday evenings, Thursday afternoons, Saturday mornings when we used to do breakfast and farmers markets together. Travis had a crisis. Kelly had to respond. The rest of her life, including me, got scheduled around his emotional emergencies. Don't you think it's possible he's manipulating you? I asked one evening after she'd canceled our dinner plans for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Every crisis conveniently requires hours of in-person support from you specifically, never phone calls, never other friends, always face-to-face meetings that consume your entire day. Her reaction was volcanic. Manipulating? Are you seriously suggesting that someone's legitimate mental health struggles are manipulation? Do you have any idea how disgusting that sounds? Travis is going through genuine trauma, and you're sitting here playing armchair psychologist, diagnosing him with manipulation because what? You're jealous that I have compassion for another human being. The word jealous hit like an accusation of moral deficiency. I'm not jealous. I'm concerned that you're being emotionally exploited by someone who knows exactly which buttons to push. His grandmother's been dying for 8 weeks now. His brother's accident was 6 weeks ago, but he's still processing it 3 times a week. These aren't emergencies, Kelly. They're excuses. You don't understand complex trauma, she said, her voice carrying that condescending edge people use when they've read 3 psychology articles and suddenly believe they're clinical experts. Travis has layers of unresolved issues that most people can't comprehend. His emotional landscape is extremely fragile right now, and I'm one of the few people who actually understands his triggers and communication needs. He trusts me in ways he can't trust his family or his current friends. That's not manipulation. That's genuine human connection. Genuine human connection that required her physical presence multiple times per week, always at locations convenient to his apartment, always extending hours beyond their planned duration. I stopped arguing because I recognized a losing battle, but I also started preparing for inevitable system failure. You don't need a degree in psychology to recognize when someone's running 2 relationships simultaneously, trying to maintain both without committing fully to either, hoping the competing demands somehow balance instead of eventually destroying everything. The frequency escalated to a point that would have been comedic if it wasn't erasing our relationship in real time. Kelly was spending 12 to 15 hours weekly managing Travis's emotional crises, time that came directly from what we'd previously spent together. Our weekend getaways stopped happening because Travis needed her on Saturdays. Our dinner parties ended because she was too emotionally depleted from Thursday sessions to handle social obligations Friday nights. Even our basic weeknight dinners became provisional, subject to cancellation if Travis sent the signal that he needed emergency support. I watched the woman I'd planned a future with become a satellite orbiting someone else's gravity, and the most insulting part was her insistence that I was the problem for noticing. "You're being controlling," she said when I mentioned that spending 15 hours weekly with an ex-boyfriend might be affecting our relationship. This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that makes men think they own women's time and attention. I'm allowed to have friendships. I'm allowed to care about people's well-being. The fact that you can't handle me being a supportive friend says more about your insecurity than my choices. Supportive friend. That's what we were calling it now. Not ex-girlfriend providing unlimited emotional labor to ex-boyfriend. Rachel called on a Wednesday afternoon while I was debugging an authentication protocol that kept rejecting legitimate user credentials. Rachel had been my supervisor 3 years ago before taking a director position at a healthcare tech company in Philadelphia, and we'd maintained the kind of professional relationship where she'd occasionally check in about industry developments and I'd provide honest assessments of emerging database security trends. "I need someone I can trust," she said without preamble. "We're scaling faster than our infrastructure can handle, and I need a senior architect who can build systems that won't collapse when we triple our client base next quarter. The position is yours if you want it." I pulled up a notepad file and started documenting details because that's my reflex when information matters. What's the scope? Base salary $155,000, performance bonuses structured quarterly based on project completion and system uptime metrics. You'd be architecting the data infrastructure for our entire healthcare network platform. We're working with 47 hospital systems across 8 states right now, projected to hit 90 hospitals by end of next year. You'd lead a team of 12, mixture of database engineers and security specialists. Stock options vest over 4 years, and based on our current trajectory and venture funding, those could be worth significant money when we go public. The numbers represented a 76% salary increase and the kind of career acceleration that typically required a decade of incremental promotions. What's the catch? Philadelphia. We need someone on site for at least the first quarter to build team cohesion and establish protocols. After that, unlimited remote flexibility as long as deliverables stay on schedule. I need an answer by Friday because our board is pressuring me to fill this role before month end, and you're my first choice by a substantial margin. I told her I'd think about it and call her back within 24 hours, then spent the rest of the afternoon running calculations that had nothing to do with work. 76% increase meant serious money for the first time in my life, the kind of salary where you stop checking your account balance before making routine purchases. Leading 12 people meant legitimate leadership experience that would define the rest of my career trajectory. Philadelphia meant leaving Minneapolis, leaving my mother who I saw twice monthly for dinners, leaving the apartment I'd carefully selected for optimal commute times and neighborhood coffee shops, leaving Kelly who was currently at Travis's apartment helping him process his grandmother's continued not dying. That evening I took Kelly to her favorite steakhouse, the one with the exposed brick and the bourbon selection she'd photographed for Instagram 6 times. I'd made reservations 3 weeks ago for this specific Wednesday because it was our 3-year anniversary of the charity fundraiser where we met, a detail I'd remembered and she'd apparently forgotten based on her surprise when I mentioned it. We ordered our usual dishes and I waited until after appetizers to bring up Philadelphia, wanting her relatively full and relaxed before introducing a topic that required actual engagement. Rachel offered me a position in Philadelphia, I said, watching her reaction carefully. Senior architect role, leading a team, substantial salary increase, equity in a company that's genuinely positioned for significant growth. Kelly looked up from her phone where she'd been scrolling through what appeared to be text messages, her attention fragmentary at best. That's nice. It's a major decision. The role starts in 3 weeks if I accept, which means relocating fairly quickly, figuring out housing, logistics, whether this is something we do together or, sorry, what? She set her phone face down on the table with that exaggerated patience people use when you've interrupted something important. Philadelphia position, what about it? I repeated the essential details: salary, team leadership, stock options, timeline, location. Watched her process the information with the intensity of someone half listening to background noise while waiting for permission to return to what actually mattered. Okay, she said when I finished. That sounds good for you. That sounds good for you. Not for us. Not about logistics or timeline or whether she'd consider relocating or how we'd handle long distance or any of the 1,000 questions that partners ask when one person's considering a major life change. Just a vague endorsement delivered with the enthusiasm of someone approving a coworker's lunch order. Would you consider moving to Philadelphia? I asked directly, eliminating ambiguity. Like, is that something you'd be open to discussing? She laughed, actually laughed, like I'd suggested something charmingly absurd. I can't just move to Philadelphia, Jake. My job is here, my friends, my entire life. You can't expect me to just uproot everything because you got a job offer. I'm not expecting anything. I'm asking if it's something you'd consider, if we try to make it work long distance, if this opportunity fits into your vision of our future together. Our future together. She repeated the phrase like she was testing its weight. I mean, we haven't really talked about that specifically, have we? We've been taking things as they come, which has been working fine. Why do we need to define everything right now? Because someone just offered me a life-changing opportunity and your response suggests you haven't thought about our life together beyond next weekend. I didn't say that, Just nodded and watched her return attention to her phone, scrolling with that focused intensity that indicated whoever was texting mattered substantially more than the person sitting across from her discussing his career. We finished dinner making small talk about her friend Ashley's engagement and a sale at her favorite boutique, surface-level conversation that required no actual thought or emotional investment. She never asked about the salary increase, never inquired about Philadelphia's cost of living or what neighborhood I'd consider or whether the company offered relocation assistance. Never once asked about my timeline for deciding, about what this opportunity meant for my professional development, about whether I was excited or terrified or conflicted. The entire topic received less attention than she'd given to Ashley's engagement ring specifications, and that differential told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in her hierarchy of concerns. I drove her home that night in silence that felt less uncomfortable than clarifying. Kelly kissed me goodbye with the distracted affection of someone already thinking about their next destination, and I watched her walk into her building while checking her phone, probably already texting Travis about whatever crisis he'd manufactured for tomorrow's session. I sat in my car for 20 minutes running the calculus that database architects excel at: input variables, processing logic, probable outputs. Variable 1. Kelly spent 15 hours weekly managing her ex-boyfriend's emotional state. Variable 2. Kelly showed zero interest in my career advancement or our shared future. Variable 3. Kelly's vision of our relationship apparently involved me remaining geographically convenient while she maintained her primary emotional investment elsewhere. Processing those variables through basic logic produced one clear output: I was the backup system, running quietly in the background, functional but not essential, easily replaced if the primary system came back online. Rachel's offer wasn't just a career opportunity, it was an exit ramp from a relationship that had already ended everywhere except the official documentation. Some people wait for dramatic breaking points, explosive fights, definitive betrayals. I'm an engineer. I recognize when systems are failing and don't waste resources trying to repair what's fundamentally broken. Kelly had shown me exactly who she was and what she valued, and I'd finally stopped trying to debug her priorities into alignment with mine. The text arrived at 9:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days after the steakhouse dinner where Kelly had demonstrated her complete disinterest in my future. I was reviewing system architecture diagrams when my phone lit up with her name: staying at Travis's apartment tonight, he's having a breakdown and might harm himself, don't overreact, just being there for someone in crisis, probably back Thursday. I read it twice, analyzing the language choices with the same attention I'd give to suspicious code. Don't overreact was preemptive defensive positioning, telling me how to feel before I'd expressed any feelings. Just being there for someone in crisis framed any objection as moral failure. Probably back Thursday meant she was planning at minimum a 48-hour stay at her ex-boyfriend's apartment and expected me to accept this as normal relationship behavior. The message wasn't requesting permission or explaining circumstances, it was informing me of decisions already made, treating me like a notification system rather than a partner whose input mattered. I typed 6 different responses, each one pointing out the absurdity of spending 2 nights at an ex's apartment, the pattern of manufactured emergencies, the disrespect embedded in her assumption that I'd just accept this. Deleted all 6 and wrote instead, "Take whatever time you need." Sent it, then immediately called Rachel. "The Philadelphia position, I'm accepting. Can we make the start date Monday?" There was a pause where I could hear her surprise processing. "That's 5 days from now. Are you sure? What about your current job, your apartment, Kelly? I'll give my 2 weeks notice tomorrow but negotiate an immediate departure with accumulated vacation time. My apartment is month to month. And Kelly just told me she's spending the next 2 days at her ex-boyfriend's apartment, so I think that relationship question just answered itself." Rachel laughed, not with humor but with recognition. "I've been there. Absolute clarity delivered at the worst possible moment. All right, I'll process the paperwork tonight and have HR send your offer letter by morning. Welcome to Philadelphia." I spent 30 minutes researching corporate relocation services before finding one that specialized in emergency moves for executives accepting sudden opportunities. Called them at 9:47 p.m. and explained my situation. 5 days to pack and transport everything from a one-bedroom apartment in Minneapolis to temporary housing in Philadelphia. The coordinator quoted me $4,200 for a 48-hour pack-and-move operation, including professional packing materials, transportation, and basic unpacking services. Expensive, but I had the savings, and the Philadelphia salary made it irrelevant arithmetic. Scheduled them for Thursday morning at 6 a.m., which gave Kelly exactly the window she'd allocated for comforting Travis while I systematically erased my presence from her life. Wednesday, I submitted my resignation with a request to use my accumulated vacation time for immediate departure rather than working a 2-week notice period. My manager was disappointed but understanding, especially when I explained the opportunity and offered to be available remotely for knowledge transfer during the transition. Spent my lunch hour at the apartment complex office getting my name removed from the lease, which required Kelly's signature, but the landlord agreed to process pending her approval since I was paid through next month anyway. Called our gym and canceled the joint membership, getting a prorated refund for the remaining months. Logged into every streaming service we shared and removed my payment information, leaving the accounts active under her credentials. Went to the dealership where I'd bought my car 2 years ago and sold it back to them for immediate cash, taking a modest loss but eliminating the complication of cross-country vehicle transport when Philadelphia had comprehensive public transit and I'd be living downtown initially anyway. Kelly texted Wednesday evening, "Travis is doing a bit better but still really fragile. Going to stay through tomorrow like I mentioned. Thanks for being understanding about this." Understanding. That's what we were calling my strategic withdrawal from her life. I responded with a thumbs-up emoji, nothing more, then continued systematically closing every shared account and logistical connection that tied us together. The movers arrived Thursday at 6 a.m. as scheduled, 3 guys with a truck and industrial-grade efficiency. They packed my entire apartment in 4 hours, everything I'd accumulated over 3 years of living independently, the desk where I'd studied for database certifications, the couch where Kelly and I had watched movies back when she still prioritized our time together, the bed that had somehow become a place where she'd sleep while texting Travis about his latest manufactured crisis. I supervised the packing while drafting a letter on my laptop, 2 pages explaining my decision with the same clarity I'd use for technical documentation. No anger, no accusations, just facts presented in logical sequence. The movers loaded everything by 10:30 a.m., leaving my apartment empty except for items Kelly had purchased or that had her name on receipts I'd organized into a folder for exactly this purpose. The decorative pillows she'd insisted would make the couch more inviting, the kitchen gadgets she'd bought and never used, the framed photos of us that she'd selected and arranged. I left those items staged neatly on the counter next to an envelope containing the letter, the signed lease transfer documents, a check covering my half of utilities through the next billing cycle, and my apartment key attached with a blue ribbon because even exits deserve aesthetic consideration. The letter was comprehensive but not cruel. "Kelly, I've accepted a position in Philadelphia that starts Monday. By the time you read this, I'll already be relocated and beginning the next phase of my career. The apartment lease has been transferred solely to your name, pending your signature on the documents included here. All shared accounts have been separated, and I've covered my portion of final expenses. You mentioned not wanting to uproot your entire life for my opportunities, and I respect that choice completely. What I can't respect is a relationship where I rank below your ex-boyfriend's manufactured emergencies, where my career advancement receives less attention than his emotional crises, where "don't overreact" precedes information that would make any reasonable person question their partnership's foundation. You texted me that you were staying at Travis's apartment to prevent him from harming himself, phrasing it as crisis management rather than what it actually represents. Choosing to spend multiple nights at your ex's residence while expecting me to accept this as normal. Someone who preemptively tells their partner not to have feelings has already decided those feelings don't matter. I hope you find whatever you're looking for with Travis or whoever comes next, but I'm done being the person you maintain on standby while you explore whether your ex can finally become what you need. I wish you genuinely well, but I wish myself better. I sealed the envelope, left it prominently displayed, and walked out of the apartment at 11:05 a.m. while Kelly was presumably still at Travis's place managing his fragile emotional state. The drive to Philadelphia took 11 hours with stops for gas and mediocre highway food. I listened to podcasts about database security and tried not to think about Kelly's reaction when she returned to an empty apartment, tried not to imagine her confusion or anger or the frantic calls I wouldn't answer. Checked into the extended stay housing my new company had arranged, a furnished one-bedroom in Center City with actually decent amenities and a view of buildings that weren't mine to share with anyone. Unpacked enough clothes for the week, set up my laptop, and went to bed at a reasonable hour because I had my first day at a new job Friday morning, and refusing to let Kelly's drama interfere with professional obligations was precisely the boundary I should have established months ago. Friday morning I walked into the office at 8:45 a.m., met my new team of 12 engineers and security specialists who seemed genuinely excited about having leadership that understood technical architecture, and spent the day getting oriented to systems that processed protected health information for 47 hospital networks. Rachel introduced me at the all-hands meeting as someone she'd worked with previously and trusted completely, which earned me instant credibility with a team that had apparently suffered through 2 failed architectural hires in the past year. By the time I left at 6:30 p.m., I'd mapped the existing infrastructure, identified 3 critical vulnerabilities that needed immediate attention, and designed preliminary solutions that would scale with their projected growth. My phone had remained on silent all day, and when I finally checked it during the walk back to my apartment, I found the beginning of Kelly's unraveling documented in 23 missed calls and a voicemail inbox that was apparently full. I listened to the voicemails that evening while unpacking boxes in my Philadelphia apartment, treating them like data samples that revealed patterns in human behavior when systems fail catastrophically. The first 3 were confusion. Jake, where are you? I came home and everything's gone. Your furniture, your clothes, everything. What's happening? Call me back immediately. Messages 4 through 8 escalated to panic mixed with indignation. This is insane. You just left? Without talking to me? Without explaining anything? You can't just disappear from someone's life like this. We've been together 3 years. I deserve a conversation at minimum. The irony of her demanding conversation after spending 2 nights at her ex's apartment apparently escaped her completely. Messages 9 through 15 cycled through anger. You're being incredibly immature. Running away instead of communicating like an adult. I cannot believe you're punishing me for being a supportive friend to someone in crisis. This is manipulative behavior, Jake. You're trying to make me feel guilty for having compassion. Manipulative behavior, coming from the woman who'd spent 6 months prioritizing her ex-boyfriend's manufactured emergencies while gaslighting me for noticing. Messages 16 through 20 showed the desperate bargaining phase. Okay, I read your letter. I understand you're upset about the Travis situation, but you're completely misinterpreting what's happening. He was genuinely suicidal. I couldn't just leave him alone. Can we please talk about this? I love you. We can work through this if you just answer your phone. The final 3 messages arrived Friday morning while I was in meetings, her voice progressively more raw. Fine. Don't answer. But you should know that Travis admitted he wasn't actually suicidal. He just wanted attention. He played me, and you were right about the manipulation, and now I feel like an idiot and you're not here and I don't know what to do. I didn't call back. Didn't text. Didn't engage with the crisis she'd created through months of terrible decisions that she'd defended as compassion. Saturday morning I received texts from mutual friends asking what happened, whether I was okay, if Kelly's version of events had any basis in reality. Her version apparently involved me abandoning her without warning because I was jealous of her friendship with Travis, a narrative that conveniently omitted her spending 2 nights at his apartment or the 6 months of prioritizing his emotional state over our relationship. I responded to close friends with brief facts, accepted a job in Philadelphia, Kelly was at her ex's apartment when I moved, relationship had been deteriorating for months, no interest in rehashing details. Most people seem to read between the lines, especially when Kelly started posting Instagram stories with captions about betrayal and people who run instead of communicate, as if communication had been her strong suit when she was texting me not to overreact about sleeping at Travis's place. Sunday evening my former coworker Derek called with information I hadn't requested but apparently needed to hear. So Kelly's been telling everyone that you left because you couldn't handle her having male friends, but people are starting to ask questions. Jessica pointed out that Kelly spent 2 nights at Travis's apartment, and suddenly the story stopped being about your jealousy and started being about Travis's mental health crisis. Then someone asked why Travis needed Kelly specifically for a mental health crisis instead of, actual mental health professionals. I could hear the skepticism in Derek's voice, the same analytical thinking that made him good at his job. What did Kelly say to that? She got defensive. Said that people without psychology backgrounds couldn't understand complex trauma, that Travis had specific emotional needs only she could meet. Which made everyone wonder what specific emotional needs an ex-boyfriend has that require overnight visits. Ashley apparently asked her directly why she thought you left, and Kelly broke down crying, admitted that Travis had been manufacturing crises to get her attention because he wanted her back. There was confirmation of what I'd suspected for months, delivered after I'd already extracted myself from the situation. How'd that go over? Not well. Ashley asked why Kelly kept responding to manufactured crises for 6 months, why she prioritized Travis over you repeatedly, why she expected you to wait around while she figured out whether she wanted her ex back. Kelly apparently didn't have good answers, just kept saying it wasn't like that, she was just being a good person, she never intended to hurt anyone. The classic defense of people who hurt others through sustained selfish behavior. I didn't mean to. As if impact requires intention to matter. Monday morning I received an email from Kelly, 5 paragraphs of alternating apology and justification. She'd been confused about her feelings, Travis had been manipulative in ways she hadn't recognized, she'd taken me for granted because I was stable and reliable and she'd mistaken that stability for boring complacency. She'd realized too late that what she had with Travis was drama masquerading as passion and what she had with me was actual partnership. But now I was gone and she understood she'd destroyed the best relationship she'd ever had. The email ended with a request to talk, to see if there was any path forward, any possibility of rebuilding what she'd carelessly demolished. I read it twice, composed a response, then deleted it unsent. There was nothing to say that wouldn't prolong engagement with someone who'd needed to lose me to recognize my value, which meant she'd never actually recognized my value at all. Tuesday I learned through Derek that Travis had admitted his entire strategy, he'd never gotten over Kelly, had tracked her relationship with me through social media, and had started manufacturing crises specifically to insert himself back into her life. The job loss was real but not devastating. His brother's accident was minor. His grandmother was fine. The suicidal ideation was performance art designed to test whether Kelly would prioritize him over her current relationship. Once he'd confirmed that she would, once he'd successfully consumed dozens of hours of her time and attention, he'd lost interest because the challenge was gone and her willingness to abandon her life for his manufactured drama made her less appealing rather than more. Kelly had sacrificed our relationship for a man who'd been running an experiment to see if he could, and once he'd proven his hypothesis, he'd moved on to someone else entirely. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. She'd lost me chasing someone who'd never actually wanted her back, who just wanted to confirm he could still control her attention if he chose to deploy the right emotional manipulation. Wednesday evening Kelly called from a number I didn't recognize, getting past my block with the kind of determination that would have been impressive applied to literally anything else. I answered because ignoring it meant she'd keep trying, and I preferred definitive closure to prolonged pursuit. Jake, please don't hang up. I know I don't deserve your time, but I need you to understand what actually happened. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd been crying regularly. I understand perfectly. Travis manipulated you with manufactured crises, you prioritized his emotional needs over our relationship repeatedly, and when I finally stopped accepting that treatment, you lost both of us. There's nothing complicated about that sequence. But I didn't know he was manipulating me. I genuinely thought I was helping someone in crisis. You're acting like I deliberately chose him over you, but I was just trying to be a good person. Kelly, I told you months ago that he was manipulating you. You called me controlling and insensitive. Even if we accept that you didn't recognize his tactics, you still chose to spend 15 hours weekly managing his emotional state while dismissing my concerns as jealousy. You still spent 2 nights at his apartment and told me not to overreact. Those were your choices, made repeatedly over months. The manipulation explains his behavior, not yours. Silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of her breathing and traffic noise suggesting she was outside somewhere. Finally, I miss you. I miss us. I know I don't have the right to ask, but is there any possibility you'd consider giving me another chance? No. The word came out cleaner than I expected, without hesitation or regret. Why not? People make mistakes. People learn and grow. I've learned from this, Jake. I understand now what I had and what I threw away. Because you didn't just make a mistake. You made months of consistent choices that demonstrated I wasn't your priority. And more importantly, you only want me back now that Travis isn't an option and you're facing the consequences of your decisions. If he'd actually wanted you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd still be at his apartment, and I'd still be the backup plan you were maintaining just in case. She started crying, real tears from the sound of it, not the performative ones she'd used during arguments. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You're not sorry you prioritized Travis. You're sorry it didn't work out the way you'd hoped. There's a significant difference. I hung up before she could respond, blocked the new number, and went back to reviewing security protocols for the hospital network integration I was managing. My new life didn't have space for processing someone else's regret about choices they'd made freely and defended vigorously until the consequences arrived. The next 72 hours brought a cascade of attempts to penetrate the boundaries I'd established, each one more desperate than the last. Kelly left voicemails through friends' phones, sent emails to my work address that somehow bypassed the filters I'd set, even mailed a handwritten letter to my mother's house asking her to intervene on Kelly's behalf. My mother called Thursday evening with the kind of tone that indicated she'd read the letter and wasn't impressed. She seems very upset, my mother said diplomatically. She's upset about consequences, not about her behavior. There's a difference. She says Travis manipulated her, that she didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. I could hear my mother's skepticism underneath the neutral words. Mom, I told her months ago that Travis was manipulating her. She called me controlling and kept spending 15 hours weekly managing his emotional crises. She made her choices. Now she's living with them. Good, my mother said, her voice firm. I didn't raise you to be someone's backup plan. If she wanted you, she should have acted like it when she had you. Through mutual friends, I learned that Kelly's life had begun unraveling in ways that extended beyond just losing me. She'd apparently been neglecting her pharmaceutical sales work during the months she spent managing Travis's manufactured crises, missing client meetings and failing to follow up on leads because she was emotionally exhausted from 3-hour sessions at coffee shops. Her regional manager had put her on a performance improvement plan 2 weeks before I left, something she'd never mentioned during our conversations because discussing her actual life would have required acknowledging how Travis was consuming resources she needed for basic professional function. The plan included specific metrics around client contacts and sales conversions, targets she was failing to meet because you can't build business relationships when you're spending 12 to 15 hours weekly providing unpaid therapy to an ex-boyfriend. Friday I received messages from 3 different mutual friends, all variations on the same theme. Kelly was posting increasingly cryptic Instagram stories about betrayal, people who abandon others during difficult times, learning who your real friends are when life gets hard. The comments sections were apparently becoming war zones, with some people offering support and others pointing out that she'd abandoned her relationship to spend nights at her ex's apartment, which made her poorly positioned to lecture others about loyalty. Ashley, Kelly's best friend who I'd always liked for her directness, called me Saturday morning from Kelly's phone, a tactical move to get past my blocks. Don't hang up. This is Ashley, not Kelly. I'm calling because someone needs to give you the full picture of how badly this situation has deteriorated. I considered hanging up anyway, then decided information was useful even if I wasn't going to act on it. I'm listening. Kelly's been essentially non-functional since you left. She's not eating properly, not sleeping, called out from work 3 times this week, and she's spiraling into this pit of self-recrimination mixed with blaming everyone else. She's mad at Travis for lying, mad at you for leaving, mad at herself for believing Travis, mad at me for pointing out that you warned her months ago. She keeps cycling through these emotional states and can't seem to land on anything resembling acceptance. Part of me felt sympathy for someone clearly struggling. Most of me recognized this as the natural consequence of sustained poor decisions. What do you want me to do about that, Ashley? I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to understand that she genuinely didn't recognize what was happening until Travis admitted he'd been manipulating her. She thought she was being compassionate, being a good person, being someone who doesn't abandon people during mental health crises. Ashley, with all respect, she spent 2 nights at her ex-boyfriend's apartment and told me not to overreact. Even if we accept that Travis was manipulating her, she still made that choice. She still prioritized his needs over our relationship repeatedly. She still dismissed my concerns as jealousy and control. The manipulation explains his behavior. It doesn't excuse hers. Ashley was quiet for a moment. You're right. I told her the same thing at brunch last Sunday. Asked her why she kept responding to Travis's crises for 6 months, why she expected you to wait around while she figured out her feelings, why she thought you'd just accept her spending nights at his place. She didn't have good answers, just kept saying she was trying to help someone in crisis. Because there aren't good answers. She made choices that demonstrated where I ranked in her priorities, and I responded accordingly. I don't wish her harm, but I'm not responsible for managing the emotional consequences of her decisions. Fair enough, Ashley said, and I could hear genuine respect in her voice. For what it's worth, I think you handled this exactly right. Kelly needs to learn that treating people like backup plans has costs. Maybe losing you will teach her that. Sunday evening, Derek forwarded me screenshots of a group chat conversation where Kelly had apparently asked their mutual friends whether they thought she should drive to Philadelphia to talk to me in person, to make me understand that she'd changed and learned from her mistakes. The responses ranged from supportive to brutally honest, with several people pointing out that showing up at someone's workplace after they'd explicitly ended communication would be stalking rather than romantic. Someone named Jennifer, who I vaguely remembered from a dinner party, had written, "Kelly, he moved to a different city and blocked your number. Those are extremely clear signals that he doesn't want contact. Respecting his boundaries is how you demonstrate that you've actually learned something." Kelly's response was telling, "But how is he supposed to know I've changed if I can't talk to him?" Jennifer had replied, "He doesn't need to know. You changing isn't about winning him back. It's about becoming a better person for your next relationship. Jake's gone. Accept it." Monday morning, I mentioned to Rachel that my ex might potentially show up at the office, explaining the situation briefly so security would be aware. Rachel listened with the expression of someone who'd seen this movie before. "We'll add her photo to the reception desk with instructions that she's not authorized for building access. If she shows up, security will escort her off property. Don't worry about it interfering with work." Tuesday brought confirmation through Derek that Travis was now seriously dating someone else, a woman from his gym who apparently had no history with him and therefore no emotional buttons he could manipulate through manufactured vulnerability. Kelly had discovered this through social media and was, according to reports, absolutely devastated by the revelation that Travis had moved on within weeks while she was still processing the destruction of our relationship. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. She'd sacrificed us for him, and he'd moved on before she'd even finished apologizing to me. Wednesday, I received one final email from Kelly, shorter than the previous attempts, with a different tone. No more begging for second chances or explaining her perspective. Just acknowledgement. You were right about everything. Travis was manipulating me. I was prioritizing him over you. I dismissed your concerns because accepting them would have meant admitting I was making terrible choices. I destroyed the best relationship I had chasing someone who never actually wanted me back. I don't expect forgiveness or another chance. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did and why it was wrong. I hope Philadelphia is everything you wanted it to be. I read it once, appreciated the growth it represented, and deleted it without responding. Understanding what you did wrong doesn't obligate the person you hurt to absolve you or validate your growth. Sometimes the consequence of your choices is that you don't get closure, don't get forgiveness, don't get the redemption arc you hoped for. You just get to live with what you did and hopefully do better with the next person. 4 months into Philadelphia, I'd built something that actually resembled a life rather than just existence punctuated by someone else's emergencies. The hospital network integration project I'd been hired to architect was ahead of schedule by 3 weeks, having successfully migrated patient data systems for 14 hospitals without a single security breach or significant downtime. My team of 12 engineers had gelled into an efficient unit that actually enjoyed working together, the kind of professional chemistry that makes complex problems feel manageable rather than overwhelming. Rachel pulled me aside after a board presentation where I'd outlined our security protocols for the expansion into 6 additional hospital networks. The board approved a $15,000 performance bonus for completing the initial integration ahead of schedule and under budget, she said, handing me a letter that made the bonus official. Also, they're creating a senior director of data architecture position specifically for you, effective next quarter, with corresponding salary adjustment to $180,000 base. The numbers represented financial security my mother had never experienced, the kind of stability where unexpected car repairs or medical bills don't trigger anxiety spirals about which necessity to sacrifice. I called her that evening to share the news, and her voice carried pride that made the entire Philadelphia gamble worthwhile. Outside of work, I discovered that Philadelphia actually had culture worth engaging with, something Minneapolis had offered but I'd never fully explored because Kelly's crisis management schedule had consumed our potential exploration time. I joined a rowing club on the Schuylkill River, spending Saturday mornings on the water with people who cared about technique and teamwork rather than Instagram documentation. The physical exertion was meditative, requiring enough focus that my mind couldn't wander to analyzing relationship failures or processing what-if scenarios that no longer mattered. I met Sophia at a classical music performance series I'd subscribed to, one of those decisions you make when you're newly single and trying to remember what you actually enjoy versus what you'd compromised on for relationship harmony. She was sitting 2 seats over during a string quartet performance, and we'd ended up talking during intermission about whether the cellist's interpretation was brilliant or unnecessarily dramatic. Sophia was 29, worked as a museum curator specializing in American art from the colonial period, and had the kind of specific expertise that made conversations feel like education rather than small talk. She remembered details from our discussions, would reference something I'd mentioned 2 weeks prior and build on it with her own observations, treated conversation like collaboration rather than waiting for her turn to speak. Our third date, she asked about my work with genuine curiosity rather than polite tolerance, wanted to understand how database architecture for healthcare systems differed from other industries, what specific challenges patient data presented that made the security protocols more complex. I found myself explaining technical concepts I usually simplified for general audiences, and she followed the logic, asked intelligent questions, made connections I hadn't considered. So essentially you're building invisible infrastructure that people only notice when it fails, she said, understanding the fundamental nature of my work better than Kelly had in 3 years. That must be simultaneously satisfying and frustrating. You're doing critical work that nobody acknowledges until something breaks. That insight, delivered casually over dinner at a Vietnamese restaurant she'd chosen because she'd remembered I mentioned liking pho, represented the difference between someone who listened and someone who performed listening. Sophia didn't check her phone during our conversations, didn't manufacture excuses to leave early, didn't treat our time together as provisional pending better offers. When we made plans, she kept them. When she said she'd call, she did. The reliability felt almost suspicious at first, like I'd become so accustomed to Kelly's pattern of cancellations and reprioritizations that basic follow-through seemed exceptional rather than baseline expectation. 3 months into dating Sophia, Derek called with news he'd clearly been waiting to deliver. Kelly's back living with her parents. Lost her pharmaceutical job 2 weeks ago. Apparently the performance improvement plan included metrics she never hit. Tried to find another sales position but her former manager's reference was apparently lukewarm at best. She's working retail at some clothing store in the mall, living in her childhood bedroom, and from what I hear through Ashley, she's not handling the downgrade well. I felt distant sympathy, the way you feel bad about natural disasters affecting people you used to know. That's unfortunate. There's more. Travis apparently got engaged to the gym girl. Posted it all over social media with captions about finding real love and knowing when you've met your person. Kelly saw it and had a complete meltdown at her retail job, had to leave mid-shift because she was crying in the stockroom. Ashley says she's finally in therapy, actually dealing with her issues instead of just creating crises for other people to manage. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. Kelly had lost her career momentum, her relationship, her independence, and her dignity chasing a man who'd used her for ego validation, then immediately found someone else once he'd proven he could. I hope therapy helps her, I said, meaning it genuinely. Everyone deserves to figure out their patterns before they destroy the next relationship. Ashley wanted me to tell you that Kelly asks about you sometimes. Not asking to reconnect, just wondering if you're happy, if Philadelphia worked out, if you've moved on. Ashley's been telling her you're doing great, that you're dating someone, that you seem genuinely content. Apparently it's been helpful for Kelly to know that at least one person's life improved from the situation. I thought about that, about Kelly watching from a distance as I built the life she could have shared if she'd made different choices. Part of me felt vindicated. Most of me just felt relieved I'd recognized the pattern before wasting more years on someone who valued drama over stability. Friday evening, Sophia and I were walking through Rittenhouse Square after dinner when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn connection request. Kelly had apparently found my professional profile, was requesting to connect with a message attached. I saw you got promoted. Congratulations. You deserve that. I showed Sophia, who read it with the analytical attention she brought to evaluating artwork authenticity. Are you going to accept? No point. We don't have professional overlap, and accepting would just leave a door open that should stay closed. Good, she said, slipping her hand into mine with the casual intimacy that had become comfortable over months of actual partnership. I'm selfish enough to prefer your doors stay closed to ex-girlfriends who didn't appreciate what they had. That weekend, Sophia and I started seriously discussing moving in together, looking at apartments in the historic neighborhoods near her museum that would work for both our commutes. She pulled out a spreadsheet she'd created analyzing different locations by factors including rent cost, transit access, proximity to grocery stores, and neighborhood character. The fact that she'd built a decision matrix for apartment hunting made me laugh with recognition of finding someone whose brain worked similarly to mine. You made a spreadsheet for apartment hunting? You're a database architect who probably has 18 spreadsheets for various life decisions. Don't act surprised that I bring similar methodology to major choices. She was absolutely right. I had spreadsheets for budget projections, career development timelines, investment allocation strategies, and a dozen other domains where systematic analysis improved outcomes. Kelly had found that habit boring and excessive. Sophia found it reassuring, evidence of someone who took shared decisions seriously rather than making impulsive choices and hoping they'd work out. We found a 2-bedroom in a renovated brownstone 3 weeks later, signed a lease that started in 6 weeks, and began planning the logistics of combining our lives with the same attention to detail we'd both bring to professional projects. No drama, no manufactured crises, no emergency sessions with ex-partners who'd suddenly developed urgent emotional needs. Just 2 adults building something together with mutual investment and clear communication about expectations and boundaries. I learned through social media mutual connections that Kelly had moved to a different state eventually, started over somewhere without the constant reminders of what she'd lost. I genuinely hoped she found what she needed, learned from her mistakes, built better relationships with people who didn't require her to sacrifice everything for their emotional validation. But mostly I stopped thinking about her, stopped checking for updates, stopped wondering what-if scenarios that no longer held relevance. When you're with the right person, the past stops demanding attention because the present and future provide better investment opportunities. Sophia and I moved into our brownstone apartment in late fall, spent weekends exploring Philadelphia's neighborhoods and planning Thanksgiving dinner with both our families. My mother was flying in to meet Sophia properly, and Sophia's parents were driving up from Baltimore, and the logistics required coordination but felt exciting rather than burdensome. We were building the kind of life where holidays meant celebration rather than stress, where plans stayed consistent rather than getting canceled for someone else's manufactured emergency, where both partners showed up fully rather than one person maintaining emotional availability for an ex who'd never actually wanted them back. 6 months after moving in together, I started looking at engagement rings during lunch breaks, researching diamonds and settings with the same systematic thoroughness I'd bring to any important project. Not because Sophia was pressuring me or because some timeline demanded it, but because I'd found someone who made forever sound appealing rather than terrifying, who treated our partnership like something worth protecting rather than something to maintain on standby while exploring whether damaged previous relationships could be resurrected. The ring I eventually selected was princess cut, similar style to what I'd bought for Kelly but better quality because I could afford better now and because Sophia deserved the best version of what I could offer. I wasn't recycling old dreams, I was building new ones with someone who'd actually show up to make them reality. Philadelphia turned out to be exactly what I needed. A city where nobody knew my history, a job that challenged me professionally, a partner who treated me like a priority rather than a backup plan, and the distance necessary to recognize that Kelly's version of love had been conditional on my accepting whatever treatment she felt like providing. Real love, I'd learned through Sophia, meant showing up consistently, respecting boundaries, prioritizing your partner's needs alongside your own, and not requiring them to compete with ex-relationships for basic attention and respect. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is demonstrate clearly that they don't value you enough, giving you permission to find someone who actually does.